Hey everyone, welcome here and welcome back. I'm Maika, and you've been asking questions about ADHD, relationships, and attachment styles. Can ADHDers be securely attached? How does ADHD affect romantic relationships? And how can you make a relationship work if one or both people have ADHD? And in this video, I'll address these questions. First off, ADHD and insecure attachment can be mistaken for one another, but they are different. They can coexist, but don't have to. They're independent mental health stories. So yes, someone with ADHD can have a secure attachment style and a secure, healthy relationship. They might also have any of the three insecure attachment styles as well. The main difference between ADHD and attachment styles is that ADHD has a strong genetic component. So aside from someone's childhood experiences, it's very hereditary, genealogically speaking. Attachment styles, on the other hand, describe someone's feelings, mindset, and behavior in relationships that formed based on the kind of attachment experiences they had as a child and later throughout life. Of course, someone might be born with a brain based on what was passed down in their family genealogically that is prone to be a bit more anxious, for example, but that wouldn't automatically lead to preoccupied anxious attachment style without the corresponding childhood experiences. ADHD also affects more areas of life as well, since it affects the brain's basic functions of attention, impulsivity, and executive functioning. That means someone's self-regulation is difficult with ADHD in general, and that also affects relationships. Attachment styles, however, are only about how someone forms emotional bonds with others, responds to intimacy or their partner's needs. It's not so much about their time management or impulsivity. So independently of the specific attachment style someone with ADHD has, their ADHD will affect their relationship on its own. Even if someone with ADHD has a secure attachment style, their relationship may be more conflict-ridden due to their ADHD and how that affects their brain's executive functioning. One of the main difficulties ADHDers have is impulsivity. If they have an urge, it's really hard for them to stop themselves, even if that urge isn't helpful. And that is something that is hard for most people, but it's exponentially harder for someone with ADHD. So in relationships, they often say and do stuff that they later regret because they were driven by an urge and being reactive. This can also make them come across as more aggressive as they would come across without ADHD. By the way, I say may because no two ADHDers are exactly alike. So if you or your partner has ADHD, you or they might not have some of the problems that I'm describing. ADHDers are what's called rejection sensitive. That means if someone criticizes them, that comment will be more hurtful to them than it would be to a neurotypical person. And afterwards, they're more preoccupied processing that comment. By the way, I've also observed that they're also appreciation sensitive. So they also have a stronger reaction to positive and appreciative comments. And to an ADHDer, a positive comment can make much more of a difference than to a neurotypical person. ADHDers also have difficulty stopping themselves if they've started a certain activity. So shifting from one activity or one mode into the other is really hard for them. And in relationships, conversations, and interactions, that means if they've started talking, it can be really hard for them to stop. And they might talk longer and take more room in a conversation than the person they're talking to would expect given the time constraints of the situation or that person's desire to also contribute something to the conversation. And this can leave the person they're talking to, their partner, feeling like the ADHDer doesn't care about them, that they don't care what they have to say because they're not giving them a chance to say something without interrupting. ADHDers also don't really like being interrupted because that will interrupt their train of thought and it's harder for them to come back to it. So they also often have this vibe and air of, please don't interrupt me. And here's the important thing. This does not mean that the ADHDer doesn't care. They can care or not care just as much as anyone else. ADHD doesn't say anything about how much someone cares, but it can come across as though they don't care because of their difficulties with self-regulation. But that's what it is. a difficulty in self-regulation, a difficulty finding a point to stop, a difficulty remembering time is also a part of the situation and it's running out and the other person hasn't had a chance to speak. ADHDers also have difficulty with something called object constancy. This means that if an object or person isn't in their immediate proximity, their brain will not remind them that this person is somewhere out there waiting for a response to a text. And that again can come across as if they don't care, or it could be mistaken for an avoidant attachment style. And in this case, you could distinguish between the two by observing how the person behaves also when you're together and interacting, because an avoidant will also be avoiding hard topics and conflict or intimacy in interactions, whereas an ADHDer will only come across as avoidant when you're not around them if they don't also have an avoidant attachment style. Emotion regulation is also difficult with ADHD. ADHDers can have quick mood shifts and can experience depressive and anxious phases several times a day. And that, again, will also affect their relationships because it'll be harder for them to show up in a regulated state. ADHD makes taking care of basic life organization extremely difficult. And in relationships, that can mean that the ADHDer really struggles to contribute their share to household activities like grocery shopping, cleaning, and cooking. And that can lead to burnout or resentment in their partner, especially if there's no healthy communication around these topics. I already talked about how ADHD can be mistaken for avoidant attachment because an ADHDer has difficulty responding to texts and being in contact when you're not in the same space physically, and how to tell the difference between the two. ADHD can also be confused with fearful avoidant attachment because of the mood swings. And like I said, it could also coexist. If someone only has ADHD, though, their mood swings will be connected to all sorts of things going on in their life, whereas in a fearful avoidant, their mood swings are mainly centered around what's going on in the relationship or in their own inner patterns connected to attachment, not to other things going on in life. When ADHD gets confused with a preoccupied anxious attachment style, that could be because of the ADHDers' rejection sensitivity and preoccupation processing hurtful comments. Could also be because of their difficulty regulating emotions. And again, it can coexist. If you want to see is it only ADHD or preoccupied anxious attachment, again, you'd have to look at how much of the typically anxiously attached behavior is also present, or is it concentrated on very specific ADHD things? What's important to look at if you want to tell the difference between ADHD and an insecure attachment style is to see how much that person is also affected in other areas of life beside their relationship difficulties. Someone who only has an insecure attachment style but not ADHD wouldn't, for example, have difficulty taking care of boring paperwork, watching a whole movie, reading a book, or sitting still. And of course, the best way to find out is by proper diagnosis from a professional. What now? What can you do if you or your partner or both of you have ADHD and you'd like to build a fulfilling, close, secure relationship? All of the principles that apply to neurotypical people about building secure relationships also apply to you. And add to that, you need to communicate about the ADHD and the problems that arise from it, and then find solutions that work for you as an individual couple. As a coping strategy, ADHDers often hide their ADHD traits and behaviors. This is called masking. This is when an ADHDer tries to seem neurotypical to fit in a neurotypical world. And that costs the ADHDer a lot of energy. It makes it impossible to talk about the difficulties coming from ADHD, and it creates a lot of shame in the ADHDer, which is ultimately what drives people to insecure attachment behavior. ADHDers are often among the people who carry the most shame at their core, feeling like something's fundamentally wrong with them, like they're not enough, like they're not worthy of a secure relationship. And it makes sense. Imagine going through life and every couple hours you get a feedback that you don't fit in, that something's wrong with you, that you're doing something that's not appropriate. That creates a lot of shame in ADHDers often. And this layer of shame adds a whole nother layer of difficulty on top of the difficulties they already have with the ADHD. Shame often brings a lot of dysfunctional coping strategies into a relationship. And I've talked about the 3 main dysfunctional coping strategies for shame before. That's avoidance, counterattack, and surrender. Avoidance means people become avoidant of emotional intimacy, connection, open communication. They isolate, hide, ruminate, procrastinate. Counterattack means people become impulsive and aggressive, try to prove their worth by minimizing others. And surrender makes people more vulnerable to toxic relationships because they carry the belief that this is all the treatment I deserve. So the most important message an ADHDer needs to internalize is that although throughout your whole life, the world has probably been signaling to you that something's wrong with you, it's not. And of course, you have your challenges with ADHD, but that doesn't mean that something's wrong with you on that fundamental level of identity, worth, and lovability. When you separate your worth from your ADHD, that makes it easier to effectively communicate with your partner about your ADHD. Because whenever something's difficult due to the ADHD, that doesn't mean, here's another instance of my fundamental brokenness. Let me hide it, avoid it, and cover it up, which then feeds right back into your shame and increases relationship conflict. It then means, I just struggled with something because my brain is neurodivergent. Let me see how we can talk about it so it doesn't affect our attachment. And if you don't have a partner yet, separating your worth from your ADHD means feeling more worthy of a caring partner, feeling lovable. Aside from working on letting go of shame and masking and practicing self-worth and effective communication, you can also work on skills that help you cope with the ADHD and minimize the consequences, the negative consequences it has on your life and relationships. There are helpful exercises you can do to practice impulse control, emotion regulation, and relationship skills. Look for books and professionals that are specialized in helping ADHDers. And for most people, that won't mean that their ADHD will go away completely, but things can drastically improve with these skills. There's a couple on the internet that shares a lot of examples of what it's like to be in a secure relationship with an ADHDer. They're called Richard Pink and Roxanne Emery. Roxy has ADHD, and they share what that's like for their relationship and how they communicate around it. Their social media accounts are called ADHD_love. And they've also written several books like this one, Dirty Laundry. This book actually moved me deeply. And I think they're a great example of secure attachment with ADHD. I hope this answered your main questions. Let me know if you have more in the comment section. I like creating content that answers your questions. Although I can't guarantee I'll get to every single one, especially as the channel keeps growing. Till next time, take care. And to the ADHDer, remember, you're a wonderful, neurodivergent, good, worthy, and lovable person.